a very warm welcome to the last lecture on the course on Science, Technology and Society. In the last lecture, what we are going to do is that we are going to discuss all the lectures in a chronological order, in a thematic order. Okay? We are going to sum up the entire course. Okay? I mean week wise and lecture wise also. Okay? All 12 weeks as well as the lecture components which are very much implicit in those respective weeks. Okay? What we did at the outset, that we started with the interrelationship between science, technology and society, okay, and the kind of cognitive and ethical questions which are involved in this interrelationship between science, technology and society. Okay. The lecture 1, it covered a part of cognitive dimensions, and the second part was covered in the lecture, in the second lecture, and the third lecture covered ethical dimensions. Okay. What we did in the first week itself, we started with certain epistemological questions. What does epistemology refer to? Epistemology refers to a body or theory of knowledge. Why is it so? No, precisely because of the central political philosophical questions which epistemology addresses. That is, what is knowledge, what counts as knowledge, how is knowledge produced, and so on. And in the epistemological questions, we also discussed what ethics refers to. Ethics refers to a study of nature of conduct. Why is it so? Why is ethics regarded as a study of nature of conduct? Precisely because of the central political philosophical questions which ethics addresses. What is good? What is bad? What is right? What is wrong? And so on. And then we discussed the thematic preliminaries of the relationship between science, technology and society. I mean, what is technology? We discussed technology is the medium through which human beings have been interacting with nature. When I say nature, it includes both natural and social phenomena. Then what is science? Science may be an inquiry, science may be a method, science may be an institution, science may be an ideology, science may be called, science may be known, science may be considered a transition from the world of unknowability to a world of knowability. Okay? I mean, science is an inquiry into the nature and limits of a particular knowledge, that is scientific knowledge. When I say nature of scientific knowledge, I mean the scope and ambit of scientific knowledge, but when I say limits of scientific knowledge, I do not, by limits I do not mean limitations. By limits I mean under what limiting conditions science is practiced or pursued. Okay? We have already discussed this, and thereby we tried to provide the interrelationship between science, technology and society. There are different perspectives on this relationship, there are different perspectives on STS, there are different models of STS, namely the linear model or hierarchical model, secondly the interactionist model, and thirdly the embedded model. Okay? We have discussed this, and what we have discussed in the linear and interactionist model, that they depict these two models, the linear or hierarchical model and the interactionist model, they belong to, or they come under the internalist characterization of science. Okay? As once Karl Mannheim said, all knowledge except scientific knowledge is socially and culturally conditioned. Okay? Whereas, the embedded model suggests that the relationship between science and technology is symbiotic, science and technology are not separate entities, society is not outside the purview of science and technology, or science and technology are they do not fall under they cannot be isolated while examining this interrelationship. Rather, both science and technology are very much a part of social formation, cultural formation, political formation, economic formation, right. That is why the embedded model comes under the externalist account of science. As David Bloor said, all knowledge including scientific knowledge is socially caused. Okay? Even Kuhn said science should be seen in terms of its historical integrity. What Marx said that science, what is science? Science is a social creation. Okay? That is why whenever we discuss science and technology or science, technology and society, okay, we must examine them, okay, not in isolation, but the way they have been embedded historically. Okay. In cognitive dimensions, okay, part 1 and part 2, okay, what we have discussed, that we have tried to go beyond, the embedded model, as once Bourdieu said. Okay, science as a force must go beyond the absolutist idealist conception of the immanent development of science on the one hand, and historical relativism of those who consider science to be a purely conventional social construct on the other. I mean, when I say absolutist idealist conception of the immanent development of science, I mean the internalist account of science. When I say historical relativism, I mean I refer to the externalist account of science. Okay? Science must go beyond. Even Hari Babu, he suggested that the distinction between the internal and the external worlds of science is not rigid, but porous. Okay? We must go beyond such extremes. Okay? In cognitive dimensions, again what we have discussed, I mean, to challenge such internalist accounts of science, okay, we have discussed technological determinism. What is that technological determinism? Now, technological determinism refers to the idea that technology develops as the sole result of an internal dynamic and then unmediated by any other influence mold society to fit its patterns. Okay? But what we find is that technology is very much a byproduct of social formation. Okay? The neutrality of technology very often you will find that people very often say that no, even scholars, intelligentsia, they suggest that no, technology is neutral. Okay? But the neutrality of a technology very much depends upon the way it is designed and the way it is controlled. That is how we gave the example of Robert Moss's construction of the New York Bridge. Okay? How the construction of the New York Bridge by Robert Moses reflects racial prejudice and class bias. That is how technology is not neutral. Okay? It is not neutral. Technologies have various political properties. What matters is not technology itself, but the social or economic system in which it is embedded. Machines, whenever you talk about technology within cognitive dimensions we are discussing, okay, whenever you talk about machines, structures and systems of modern material culture, okay, they are often examined, these artifacts, machines, structures, systems of modern material culture, technologies, they are often examined in terms of productivity, in terms of efficiency, in terms of positive and negative and environmental effects. But the most important thing is that it is very important to examine the way machines, structures, systems of modern material culture, technologies, they embody power and authority. Okay? This is important. That is why we discussed Louis Mumford's classification of two technological systems, one is authoritarian and the other democratic. Authoritarian technology, I mean what Mumford referred to, that is authoritarian technology is often system oriented, immensely powerful, but inherently unstable, whereas democratic technologies are human centered, relatively weak, but resourceful and durable, and hence sustainable. Okay? And that is why we discussed how the context of knowledge production has been undergoing transition. I mean the way science and technology, they were once considered curiosity driven research, now they have become a part of contract obligations. Once they were considered a part of public resource, now they have become a part of intellectual property. And such cognitive and political changes have significant implications on political economy, labor, agriculture, health, environment and so on. Okay? And such cognitive and political changes that we see, when I say cognitive change in science, I mean the shift occurs from monovalent to polyvalent knowledge, we have already discussed. Okay? I mean how triple helix model it supersedes both traditional disciplinary boundaries and mode to knowledge production created in the context of application. I mean when I talk about triple helix model of innovation, I mean government, university, I mean academia and industry, private R&D institutions, they try to collaborate with each other. Okay? And the political change that I refer to, I mean the shift is towards fracturing of the authority of nation states with consequent pressures to rethink the forms of democratic governance. Okay? And then in the third lecture, we discussed ethical dimensions. Okay? In ethical dimensions, so far as the relationship between science, technology and society is concerned, we have discussed Mertonian ethos of science. Okay? Mertonian ethos of science, imperatives of science, goal of science, and then we moved on to how we have tried to look at Mertonian ethos of science in the present day context also. Okay? And that we discussed when we discussed when we try to dwell upon inequalities in science, which will come we have covered in the 5th week. Okay? Now, in Mertonian ethos of science, then what do we mean by ethos of science? Now, ethos of science refers to the effectively toned complex of values and norms, which is held to be binding on the man of science. And these values, these norms are often expressed in the form of prescriptions, proscriptions, preferences and permissions. Okay? We have discussed prescriptions, proscriptions, preferences and permissions. I mean prescriptions, you know, their norms, their even doctor prescribes, right. When I say proscriptions, they are such norms which are bound by law, legally bound. Okay. Preferences, you know, choices, permissions, I mean it requires somebody to allow. Okay. The goal of science, according to Merton, is the extension of certified knowledge. Okay. which can be spelt out in terms of its technical methods. What Merton tried to refer to technical methods, I mean empirically confirmed and logically consistent statements of regularities. These are often predictions. Okay. The imperatives of science for Merton derive from the goal and the methods. Then what is the goal of science? Imperatives of science, if they are derived from the goal as well as the methods, the goal of science is the extension of certified knowledge, and the methods according to Merton, they include empirically confirmed statements of regularities, be consistent, seek knowledge, certify knowledge, and they must follow logically consistent statements of regularities. Okay. Then what are for Merton, what are the institutional imperatives or ethos of modern science? Now, the ethos of modern science are fourfold for Merton: okay, universalism, communism, disinterestedness, and organized skepticism. What does universalism refer to? Universalism refers to, I mean, the acceptance or rejection of a scientific claim should not depend upon the personal or social background of the individual offering that claim. Communism, what we say, what Merton referred to, that there's whatever development of technology that we encounter, we witness today, must be shared by the community of scientists, should be shared by the collective. Okay. Individualistic orientation of science must be scorned off. Okay. That is why when we talk about communism in science, okay, it acts against the present day intellectual property. Okay. When you look at disinterestedness as another ethos of modern science propounded by Merton, I mean, science should go beyond interests and ideologies. The practitioner of science must not be bound by any kind of interests or ideology. What does organized skepticism refer to? Organized skepticism refers to the fact that we must temporarily suspend our judgment, we must postpone our judgment until and unless all facts are at hand. Okay? This is a methodological imperative, technical imperative. If you look at Mertonian ethos of modern science, okay, this is organized skepticism. Then in the second week, I mean, we started with fourth lecture. Then, okay, we started with the methods of science. I mean, science, technology, and society methodological dimensions. Part 1. In this fourth, I mean in the third week part 2, in the fourth week part 3. Okay. We discussed methodological dimensions, methods of science in 3 weeks, in 9 lectures. Okay. We started with inductivism and hypothesism, then positivism, then Karl Popper, then Thomas Kuhn, then Popper versus Kuhn, and then Paul Feyerabend. Okay. Then we tried to summarize methods of science. Okay. In the whole period of 3 centuries, from the 17th to 19th, 2 views stand out prominently as answer to the question, I mean the Aristotelian question, that what is the method of science. One was inductivism, the other hypothesism. Inductivism suggests that the method of science is the method of induction, whereas hypothesism suggests that no, the method of science is not the method of induction, but the method of hypothesis. Inductivism was founded by Francis Bacon, whereas hypothesism was founded by René Descartes. Perhaps for this reason, inductivism is also known as Baconian philosophy of science, whereas hypothesism is also known as Cartesian philosophy of science. Okay. Inductivism is rooted in empiricism, according to which only those ideas which are traceable to sense experience are legitimate, whereas hypothesism is grounded in rationalism, according to which a significant portion of human knowledge cannot be traced to and therefore is independent of sense experience. Inductivism looked at certainty and breadth as the hallmarks of scientific knowledge. I mean, that means science must aim at knowledge which is definite, which is certain on the one hand, and on the other broad, in the sense that it must encompass more and more of the world we seek to know. Okay? The search for certain or definite knowledge led inductivists to legislate that science must confine itself to observations, since it is only our observations that we can be certain. In other words, science, according to inductivists, must not make reference to anything unobservable. That the means of realizing knowledge that is broad, Bacon found in the principle of induction, which allows us to go from particular observations to generalizations. Thus, according to inductivists, science must aim at arriving at, with the help of the principle of induction, generalizations which cryptically contain knowledge of indefinite number of as yet unmade observations. Then what are the processes which inductivists follow? Now, then one must first collect observational data without any recourse to theory, without recourse to any theory. Then one must put forward a tentative generalization which one has to verify, and once verified, the tentative generalization becomes a law, enabling us to go from a limited number of already made generalizations, observations. Then the aim of science in the inductivist schema is to arrive at laws, that is established inductive generalizations which are only cryptic statements regarding as yet unmade observations. By accumulating such established inductive observations, inductivists claimed that we will have at our disposal an enormous amount of observations, the totality of which constitutes reality. Okay? Then science, according to the inductivist schema, thus begins with observations, remains at the level of observations, and ends with observations. If, according to inductivists, the hallmark of scientific knowledge, the hallmarks of scientific knowledge are certainty and breadth, then according to hypothesism, they are novelty and depth. That is to say, science must aim at knowledge which is new in the sense of being transobservational and deep in the sense of referring to entities underlying the phenomena given to us in observations. Then in the inductivist schema, science limits itself to observations, whereas in the hypothesist schema, knowledge is produced, science is produced only when we go beyond observations. In other words, whereas inductivists insist that science must remain from beginning to end at the level of observations, hypothesists maintain that science begins only when it goes beyond observations. Then, according to hypothesism, genuine science must aim at or rather genuine science must not remain content with generalizations based on observations, but must seek to explain observations in terms of unobservable deeper entities and processes. The term hypothesis in 17th century made a statement regarding unobservable entities and processes, though today by hypothesis we only mean a tentative solution to a problem or hunch. Whereas there is no place for hypothesis in the inductivist schema, the hypothesists maintain that the aim of science is to generate hypotheses to explain what we observe. The term theory means a statement of a set of statements, the statement about a set of statements involving at least one theoretical term. Okay? That is what we have discussed. A theoretical term, for example, electron, proton, etc., unlike an observational term, does not designate observable or measurable. Inductivists are empiricists, and empiricists maintain that anything which exists must be observable. Okay? Hence, inductivists do not admit that theoretical term designates real entities. They contend that theoretical entities are fictitious entities, are fictitious entities conjured up by us for the purposes of either economic description of observations or prediction. On the other hand, or rather to buttress the argument, to strengthen the argument, according to inductivists, theories are not descriptions of a world, of a real world of unobservables. As against this, the hypothesists maintain that the theoretical terms designate real entities not given to us in observations, and theories are descriptions of a real world of unobservable entities. Therefore, while hypothesists are called realists, inductivists are called anti-realists. Okay? We have discussed this, and then we have also discussed the principle of induction, we have discussed Hume, we have discussed Mill's principle of induction, and then in the 20th century, okay, which begins with the emergence of a school of thought called Positivism. In the 6th lecture, what we have discussed Positivism, and in the 7th lecture we have tried to end Positivism there. In the second part, the first part of Positivism, we have discussed how Positivism is an extremely well known and till recently very influential theory of science and its method. It is a closely knit set of tenets formulated with an admirable amount of clarity and consistency. Okay? What are the central tenets of Positivism? Okay? The central tenets of Positivism that we have discussed: first, methodological, that science is distinct from all areas of human activity or creativity because it possesses a method unique to it. Secondly, methodological monism, that there is only one method common to all, sciences irrespective of their subject matter, that is methodological monism. Thirdly, inductivism, that the method of science is the method of induction. Fourthly, systematic verifiability, that the hallmark of science lies in the fact that all scientific statements must be systematically verifiable. Fifthly, purity and indubitability of observations. Observations are pure, observations are indubitable, observations cannot be doubted. It is only through observations that knowledge is produced in the positivistic scheme. Okay. In sixthly, there is a unilateral relationship between observation and theory. Observations lead to theory, but theories do not lead to observations. There is a one-way relationship in the positivistic scheme. Okay. In the sense that theories are observations dependent, whereas observations are theory independent. Okay. Seventhly, we have discussed fact value dichotomy. Okay. That facts, that there must be a dichotomy between a fact and value. Facts do not have any value content, or rather facts do not have any value, whereas values do not have any factual content. That is why I gave you the example that if I say this is a laptop, this is a fact. If I say this laptop looks beautiful or ugly, then I add value to it. Okay? That is why facts are value neutral, whereas values do not have any factual content. And we have also discussed how all explanation which involves, I mean we start with a set of laws, then a set of statements describing initial conditions, thereby we come to conclude the explanation that we are going to make. Okay? I mean a set of statements describing the phenomenon to be explained, that is the conclusion. Okay? And if any theory, any law which does not follow this procedure, okay, then it is considered illegitimate, it is considered invalid, okay, and is subject to deductive nomologism. Okay. We have discussed these things, how observations presuppose theory, whereas theory does not presuppose observations. Okay. Then in the 7th lecture we have ended. I mean what we have discussed, I mean in inductivism there are 3 steps. Okay. I mean first step refers to observational data without recourse to any theory. Second step, tentative generalization which requires verification, and the third step, formulation of law. In hypothesism, one must start with a hypothesis. Okay. The second step involves the hypothesis to be tested whether right or wrong, and if it is wrong then it must be rejected. If it is tested right, then it must be accepted. That is the conclusion. Okay. In positivism, we start with observation, a set of laws, a set of statements describing initial conditions, and finally a statement describing the phenomenon to be explained. Okay. We ended with we ended positivism there in the 3rd week initial. Okay. In the 8th lecture, we started with Karl Popper. Okay. Such positivistic construal of science, that methodological monism, inductivism, systematic verifiability, fact value dichotomy, purity and indubitability of observations, and so on. Okay. Such positivistic construal of science was most systematically attacked by Karl Popper, who provided an alternative image of science. His theory of scientific method has won a lot of admirers both in science and philosophy. Whereas positivists tried to work out a sophisticated version of the view called inductivism, Popper sought to resurrect its rival, namely hypothesism. In what follows, we shall consider, I mean what we have discussed, his views on the nature of sciences along with his attack on positivistic theory of science. Okay. How he followed. I mean, it might be pointed out that for Popper the value of the philosophical interest in scientific knowledge lies in its ability to shed light on the central question of philosophy. What is the central question of philosophy for Popper? Now, that is the problem of cosmology. What is that problem of cosmology? Now, the problem of understanding the world, including ourselves, and our knowledge of the world as part of the world. And in studying Popper's contribution to our understanding of science, one must bear in mind his general philosophical concerns, which alone set in motion, guide and lend deep significance to his painstaking work on the nature of science. Okay? The philosophical inquiry into the nature of scientific method, according to Popper, must confine itself to the manner in which scientific theories are evaluated, I mean whether accepted or rejected. Popper refuses to consider as legitimate the inquiry into the way in which these theories are arrived at. Therefore, according to Popper, philosophy of science must first confine itself to the context of justification and refuse to say anything about the context of discovery. Popper considers the creative process in and through which scientific ideas are generated to be unamendable to any rational explanation. Okay? And secondly, an adequate philosophy of science, according to Popper, must provide a criterion of demarcation between science and non-science. Like positivists, Popper is convinced of the uniqueness and supremacy of science in the overall scheme of our activities aimed at knowledge acquisition. Hence, both positivists as well as Popper felt the need to demarcate science from the rest of knowledge acquisition activities. That is why positivists who were inductivists maintained that the hallmark of scientific knowledge or scientific theories lies in their systematic verifiability. And Popper replaces verifiability by falsifiability. According to Popper, the hallmark of scientific theories lies in their systematic falsifiability. Popper maintains that what distinguishes science from the rest of our knowledge is not that scientific statements are verifiable, but they are falsifiable. The scientific theories are falsifiable according to Popper in the sense that they transparently state what circumstances lead to their rejection. Whenever scientific theories are advanced, it is also stated under what conditions they turn out to be false, so that we try to obtain those conditions in order to falsify our claims. Then what are what kind of method that or what kind of steps that Popper followed? It is the method of hypothetico-deductive model which Popper followed. I mean, for Popper, one must start with the identification of a problem. Okay. Step 1. The second step suggests once the problem has been identified, suppose in the context of inductivism, one must start with observation. In the context of hypothesism, one must start with a hypothesis. In positivism also, one must start with observation. For Popper, one must start with a problem. Okay? That is why in research, whenever we do research, we always say that one must start with a question. Okay? Then, once the problem is identified, then we must provide a tentative solution to a problem or hunch, that is called hypothesis. Then a hypothesis requires to be tested. If it is tested wrong, then it must be refuted. It is subject to refutation. And if it is tested right, then it should not be accepted as in the hypothesis schema, rather it should be corroborated, that is keeping that hypothesis permanently tentative. Okay? In the 8th and 9th lectures, we have discussed Karl Popper. Okay? And under what conditions it must be corroborated, we have already discussed. Okay? In the 4th week, third section of methodological dimension, third and final section in this course. Okay? We started with Kuhn, then Popper versus Kuhn, and then Paul Feyerabend. Kuhn, rather Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions constitutes a turning point in the 20th century philosophy of science. For according to Kuhn, the life of every major science passes through two stages which can be characterized as pre-paradigmatic stage and paradigmatic stage. During the pre-paradigmatic period of a science, one finds more than one mode of practicing that science. Thus, there was a time when there were different schools in astronomy which practiced astronomy differently. So was the case with disciplines like physics, chemistry and biology too. Their situation at that stage of their development was similar to the one which obtains today in the case of creative areas like art, literature, philosophy and even medicine, wherein divergent modes of practicing these disciplines coexist. Whereas, even today we speak of schools of art, schools of literature, schools of philosophy and systems of schools of medicine, we do not speak of schools of astronomy, schools of physics, schools of biology, etc. This is because according to Kuhn, areas like art, literature, philosophy and medicine did not and perhaps cannot make a transition from pre-paradigmatic stage to a paradigmatic stage. So, what characterizes a science or mature science according to Kuhn, which enters the paradigmatic stage, is the disappearance of schools, is the disappearance of those divergences. In other words, the transition from the pre-paradigmatic stage to the paradigmatic stage implies the replacement of plurality by uniformity of practice. When a science reaches the paradigmatic stage, it becomes a mature or science in the present sense of the term. Then what are the steps which Kuhn followed? Science, I mean progress of science, methods of science. First stage, pre-paradigmatic stage, from pre-paradigmatic stage to paradigmatic stage to normal science to anomalies, anomalies to crisis, from crisis to new paradigm mediated by a revolutionary science. That is why Kuhn also foregrounded the similarities between a scientific revolution and a political revolution, okay, in the structure of scientific revolution. And then we discussed Popper-Kuhn comparisons, Popper versus Kuhn. Some of the radical implications of Kuhn's position can be brought about by juxtaposing his views with those of Popper. The hallmark of science according to Popper is critical thinking. In fact, science exemplifies critical thinking at its best, since critical thinking considers nothing to be settled and lying beyond all doubt. Fundamental disagreements and divergent thinking must in fact do characterize science. As we have discussed, according to Kuhn, what constitutes the essence of scientific practice is normal science, and we have also seen why normal science is a highly tradition bound activity, an activity made possible by a consensus among the practitioners who share a paradigm. Okay? If Popper sees the essence of science is divergent thinking and fundamental disagreements, then Kuhn sees the essence of science in convergent thinking and consensus. Okay? That is why Kuhn also said that normal science, what is normal science? It is a traditional, it is a tradition bound activity, it is a puzzle solving activity. If normal science is a tradition bound activity, then for Kuhn, revolutionary science is a tradition shattering activity. Okay? According to Kuhn, the hallmark of science is tradition bound activity. In fact, according to Kuhn, what distinguishes science from the other areas of creative thinking is that whereas in science one finds institutional mechanisms of enforcing consensus, the other areas suffer from perpetual disagreements even on fundamentals. And secondly, if Popper considers the individual to be the locus of scientific activity, Kuhn bestows the status upon the scientific community. Both positivists as well as Popper looked upon science as the sum total of the work of individual scientists working in accordance with a method, though positivists and Popper fundamentally differed on the characterization of that method. As opposed to this individualistic account of scientific enterprise, Kuhn propounds a collectivistic account of scientific activity. Okay? Thirdly, Popper and Kuhn differ fundamentally in their attitude towards the transition from one theory to another in science. According to Popper, we can explain every case of theory change in terms of certain norms which science always adopts and follows meticulously. In fact, scientific rationality consists in following these norms. but Kuhn contends that an adequate explanation of theory change must be in terms of the value judgments made by a community while making the choice. Hence, according to Kuhn, recourse to the so called methodological norms explains nothing. This is how we try to look at the comparison between Popper and Kuhn, and then we in the 12th lecture we moved on to Paul Feyerabend's reflections on the methods of science. Paul Feyerabend in his classic Against Method outline of an anarchistic theory of knowledge repudiates the very idea of scientific method. Both on grounds of logic and history, he calls into question, Feyerabend calls into question the time honored belief that there is something called the method of science which distinguished science from the rest of our cognitive activities. This traditional view which is called by Feyerabend law and order philosophy of science maintains that there are certain unchanging norms which determine scientific practice. Though philosophers of science, as we have seen, starting from inductivists, hypothesists, positivists, Popper, Kuhn and so on, though they differ in their account of what they consider to be the methods of science, all of them maintain that there are at least two conditions which ought to be met with by any theory that is proposed for acceptance. These conditions are called consistency condition and correspondence condition. According to the consistency condition, the new theory must be consistent with the already well established theories, whereas according to the correspondence condition, the new theory must correspond to the well established facts. According to Feyerabend, both these conditions are illegitimate in the sense that their acceptance hinders the progress of science. By insisting upon the consistency condition, the traditional philosophers of science, both positivists as well as Popperian, overlook the fact that the so called well established theories may themselves be faulty, and their faulty character might come to surface only if we allow acceptance of the new theory provisionally. In other words, if a new theory is inconsistent with the existing theories, which we believe to be extremely well supported, the fault may not be necessarily with may not necessarily be with the new theory, but with the latter, whose serious limitations may become obvious to us only by adopting an alternative theory. That is to say, by insisting upon the consistency condition, we may be thwarting the chances of a very good theory and remain blind to the serious lacunae of the existing theories, which we might miss only because we remain confined to these theories. However, we may never become aware of these new facts unless we transcend these theories and adapt an alternative, just as we cannot become aware of all the defects of our own society unless we look at it from the point of view of another society. Similarly, the correspondence condition too cannot be sustained. By insisting upon the correspondence condition, the traditional philosophers of science overlook the fact that the new theory might fail to correspond to facts, because facts themselves may degenerate to the sense they are interpreted consciously or otherwise in terms of a theory which is itself questionable and whose questionability we have not realized since our thinking has been constrained by it. Given the fact that all observations are theory laden, it may be that what we consider to be observationally obvious might be absolutely wrong due to the incorrectness of the theory. Hence, Feyerabend says that a new theory must be allowed to grow even if it goes against well known facts. Okay? It may be mentioned here that of the two conditions, the correspondence condition is more primary because the consistency condition can be reduced to it. For the consistency condition says that a new theory must be consistent with existing theories if the latter are supported by facts. In other words, the consistency condition seeks to guarantee that a new theory corresponds with known facts by being consistent with existing theories. By rejecting both consistency as well as correspondence conditions, Feyerabend advocates that a new theory should not be constrained by the rule that it should first correspond with facts which we already know. In fact, Feyerabend says that we must make deliberate attempt to develop theories which go counter to the so called well known facts. That is why in a famous statement, I mean that this is a famous statement which Feyerabend made, that give me any norm you like, I will show that it is violated at certain important phases in the history of science, not by oversight or negligence, but consciously and deliberately. Okay. Then what we have done in the 12th lecture, that rejection of consistency as well as correspondence condition, okay, becomes primary to the way Feyerabend tried to repudiate the very idea of scientific method. The basic thrust of the second, third and fourth week lectures, okay, the basic thrust of this whole discussion on methods of science, methodological dimensions, is to foreground the various issues which philosophers, historians and sociologists of science are grappling within their attempt to understand the methods of science as a cognitive enterprise. It may be mentioned that it may be mentioned in this connection that social scientists usually work with some conception of science and its method. Since such a conception very much informs their work, it is necessary that they should free themselves from received notions and naive ideas about science presented by textbooks and deeply entrenched in popular psyche. All that discussion has, this discussion has sought to achieve is to hammer the point, okay, that the pattern, hammer the point that the pattern of scientific theory or the pattern of scientific thinking is too complex to be captured by a catalogue of thumb rules pompously presented as the principles of scientific method. Okay. From here onward, the challenges to the received notions about science, okay, from this we in the fifth and sixth week, we have discussed inequalities in science, Mertonian reflections on inequalities in science, part 1 and part 2. What we have done, we have discussed in the fifth week, starting with 13th lecture, then 14th and 15th lectures. The Matthew effect in science, we have already discussed how the reward and communication systems of science are considered. Then what is that in the case of Matthew effect that we have discussed? The Matthew effect of accumulated advantage described in sociology is a phenomenon sometimes summarized by the adage that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The concept is applicable to matters of fame or status, but may also be applied literally to cumulative advantage of economic capital. The term, this Matthew effect in science, this term was coined by sociologist Robert King Morton in 1968 and takes its name from the parable of the talents in the biblical gospel of Matthew. Morton credited his collaborator Harriet Zuckerman as co-author of the concept of the Matthew effect. What are these? How inequalities in science are reflected in terms of rewards and recognitions. Okay. Psychosocial processes affect the allocation of rewards to scientists for their contributions. This is an allocation which in turn affects the flow of ideas and findings through the communication networks of science. Okay. And such conception is based upon an analysis of the composite of experience reported in Harriet Zuckerman's interviews with Nobel laureates in the United States and upon data drawn from the diaries, letters, notebooks, scientific papers and biographies of other scientists. Okay. In this week, what we have discussed, we have discussed the reward system in science, the Matthew effect in the reward system, the Matthew effect in the communication system, okay, and the Matthew effect and the functions of redundancy, then the psychological and the social and psychological basis of the Matthew effect, and the Matthew effect and allocation of scientific resources. In the 6th week, I mean second part of inequalities in science, we have discussed the cumulative advantage and the symbolism of intellectual property in 3 parts, okay, in 16th lecture, 17th lecture and 18th lecture. In the 6th week, we have discussed the second part of inequalities in science. Again the Matthew effect in science, I mean Mertonian reflection on the Matthew effect in science to capture inequalities in science. I mean the Matthew effect in science, I mean in terms of or inequalities in science in terms of cumulative advantage and the symbolism of intellectual property. In 3 hours, I mean in 16th lecture, in the 17th lecture and in the 18th lecture, we have discussed this. What is this cumulative advantage? Cumulative advantage in science refers to the social processes through which various kinds of opportunities for scientific inquiry as well as the subsequent symbolic and material rewards for the results of that inquiry tend to accumulate for individual practitioners of science as they do also for organizations engaged in scientific work. Cumulative advantage in science directs our attention to the ways in which initial comparative advantages of trained capacity, structural location and available resources make for successive increments of advantage such that the gaps between the haves and the have-nots in science as in other domains of social life widen until dampened by countervailing forces. Intellectual property in science, I mean in the section on intellectual property in science, Merton proposed the seeming paradox that in science private property is established by having its substance freely given to others who might want to make use of it. Certain institutionalized aspects of this intellectual property system, chiefly in the form of public acknowledgement of the source of knowledge and information, thus freely bestowed on fellow scientists, relate to the social and cognitive structures of science in interesting ways that affect the collective advancement of scientific knowledge. Okay? The world of science has been designed in such a way, it is like a pyramid, I mean it is like a triangle. Okay? You will find more scientists with a very few rewards and recognitions at the bottom level, and at the top you will find a very few scientists with more and more rewards and recognitions. For example, a prize will almost always be awarded to the most senior researcher involved in a project, even if all the work has been done was done by a graduate student or a junior scientist. That is why according to Merton, the world is peculiar in this matter of how it gives credit. It tends to give the credit to already famous people. Okay? And then we have discussed accumulation of advantage and disadvantage among the young scientists, I mean junior scientists, accumulation of advantage and disadvantage among scientific institutions, organizations. I mean if the what Merton tried to look at, if the processes of accumulating advantage and disadvantage are truly at work, why are there not even greater inequalities than have been found to obtain? Then he went on to discuss countervailing processes, and then he looked at the symbolism of intellectual property in science. We have already discussed this, and then what we have done, we have discussed technology as knowledge. Okay. To start with, we started with Max Weber, reflections on technology as knowledge in the 7th week, I mean in lecture number 19, how Weberian reflection on the process of knowledge production as a composite product of or rather the way Weber tried to reflect on knowledge production is involves an interpretative method. That interpretative method is a reconciliation between two approaches, namely positivism, we already know, and neo-Kantianism. Okay. And Weber, we have also discussed in Weber different types of social action, namely traditional social action, affective or emotive social action, value rational social action, and goal rational social action. We have also discussed structure of authority in Weber's schema, legal authority, I mean ideal typical bureaucracy, traditional authority, and charismatic authority. And then we have done a preliminary exercise and explanation so far as inequalities in science is concerned and technology as knowledge. Before we moved on to Edwin Layton Jr.'s reflection on technology as knowledge. Okay. In the 8th week, we have discussed the social shaping of technology part 1. I mean social shaping of technology has been discussed in over a period of 3 weeks, over a period of 9 lectures. We started with Langdon Wiener, then we have discussed Donald Mackenzie and U.D. Walkman, and then Thomas Edison, and then we have discussed many authors reflections, maybe Marx's reflections, maybe Braverman's reflections on capitalism, class, gender, city, machine, workplace, and so on. These 3 weeks we have discussed technology and social shaping of technology. We have discussed technology and politics. Then we have discussed technical arrangements as forms of order. Then we have discussed how technologies are inherently political, I mean inherently political technologies. Then we have discussed, I mean in as if you go a little back to the 7th week, I mean technology as knowledge, we have discussed how things are commonly done or made and what things are done or made. I mean this is also a part of social construction of technological systems. Then we have discussed Mackenzie and Walkman, Edison's electric light, electric bulb, I mean ability to design, ability to control, limitations of Hall's theory of science technology relation, Coates' position. In Edison and electric light, we have discussed history of ideas and the study of problem solving. Okay. I mean how Edison was not simply an entrepreneur, but I mean not simply as an he was not simply an inventor, but also he may be called an inventor entrepreneur. How technological determinism as a theory of society, then hard and soft technological determinism as a theory of society, then technological determinism as a theory of technology. We have in Mackenzie and Walkman's reflections, we have discussed, does science shape technology, then technological shaping of technology, and then economic shaping of technology, and we have then therefore economic shaping is social shaping. Then we have discussed the relationship between technology and the state and military technology, theorizing the technology society relationship. We have also discussed the social construction of technological systems as propounded by Biker and Pinch, then actor network theory by Latour and his colleagues, then feminism and technology, I mean gender and technology, ethnicity and technology, Haraway's reflection on cybernetic organism, then Marx's reflections on technology as a byproduct of the present mode of production, I mean capitalism, and how class relations are mediated by that, by technology, I mean the machine versus the worker. Then technology and capitalist control by Harry Braverman, I mean how Braverman's reflections on labor and monopoly capital is very important, are very important on so far as the social shaping of technology is concerned. Then we have also discussed the case of the smart house, that is a gendered socio-technical construction. Okay. I mean how innovation can be generated, can be a gendered process, how the smart house can be a gendered socio-technical construction, what kind of household activities are the new artifacts or appliances meant for, and what material appliances are in the making. Okay. We have also discussed smart house prototypes, the Honeywell house, the NAHB house, smart house, Xanadu and so on, and what do designers have in mind. Okay. Designers often keep energy, safety, communication, entertainment, environment and so on in mind while going ahead with smart house construction. But where is the housework? Okay. Housework perhaps is out of sight and out of mind when we talk about technology. That is why it is very important to discuss social shaping of technology. Women as a social group, as though they are relevant, they are a socially relevant group, but they remain absent in the construction of this. Okay. That is why the smart house is often considered a masculine construct. That is why we have already discussed the decline, there must, I mean that one size fits all paradigm must go, and we have also discussed a history of contraceptive technologies, the institutionalization of women as the other. There is a shift in focus from similarities to differences, the institutionalization of women as the other. I mean the development of the first physiological means of contraception focused exclusively on women, and whether we have to look at whether we have to modify technology to fit people, or we have to modify people to fit technology. Okay. This is what we want to interrogate, that we must be able to modify technology to fit our people, fit our culture. Okay. Then we moved on to the 11th week, okay, on information society. We witness many emerging technologies today, maybe in the form of information technology, maybe in the form of biotechnology, maybe in the form of nanotechnology and so on. But for this course, we have restricted our discussion to only information technology. Okay. In the 11th week, I mean in the 31st lecture, in the 32nd lecture and the 33rd lecture, we have discussed information society as propounded by Alvin Toffler, Daniel Bell, and what are the themes and factors of information technology, and then information technology and how class can be the Marxist notion of class may be rejected, reasserted and reconceptualized. Okay. In Toffler, we have discussed the third wave. I mean the first wave is characterized by agricultural society, the second wave is characterized by industrial society, and the third wave is characterized by the information society. Okay. Then what are the 6 grounding principles of the third wave or Toffler's third wave that we have discussed? That is standardization, specialization, synchronization, maximization, concentration and centralization. Okay. We have also discussed Daniel Bell's reflection on the information society in the context of post-industrial society. What is that post-industrial society? A post-industrial society is one where knowledge has displaced property as the central preoccupation and the prime source of power and social dynamism. A post-industrial society is one where technicians and professionals are the preeminent social groups. A post-industrial society is one where service industries are more important than manufacturing. And we have discussed the shift from post-industrial society to information society. I mean, the centrality of theoretical knowledge, rise to prominence of professional, scientific and technical groups, a new social framework based on telecommunications. Information is being treated as a commodity. Knowledge and information supplant labor and capital as the central variables of the economy, and the end of the industrial capitalist era and the arrival of a service or leisure society. Okay? How information technology is related to social change. I mean, what David Lyon suggested, that information technology shortens, diminishes our labor time, it diminishes production worker, IT replaces labor as the source of added value in the national product. The way knowledge is created and retrieved, okay? I mean, knowledge is being treated as a commodity, commodification of knowledge, okay? Nature of work and occupation. And in the 32nd lecture, we have discussed the themes and factors of information technology. What are the themes of information technology, suppose? Okay? I mean, information workers in an information economy, political and global aspects, and an information culture. What are the factors which influence information technology? I mean, military factor, commercial factor and government factor. Okay, we have discussed this. In the 33rd lecture, we have discussed new economy, new classes. I mean, how information technology has been able to compel us to relook at or re-examine Marx's notion of class. What David Lyon argues, that in the context of the emergence of information technology, Marx's notion of class is subject to rejection, reassertion and reconceptualization. Okay? I mean, when we say a rejection of class, Marx's notion of class, I mean, new technology holds hope of abandoning class. I mean, classlessness achieved by technical, not social revolution. When we say reassertion of class, information technology merely strengthens the hands of the already powerful capitalist class, giving it a wider global scope and tools for tighter social control. When we say there is a need to reconceptualize class, Marx's notion of class, I mean, does it mean that Marx is outdated? No. Does it imply that no, classes are disappearing? No. I mean, why there is a need to reconceptualize Marx's notion of class in the context of the emergence of information society is precisely because of the because of the fact that the introduction of new technology tilts the balance of power in different ways, realigning classes and releasing new social movements. Okay? And we also provided a critique to the information society. I mean, who wields power, inequalities, conflicts and underlying contradictions, and in the context of dominant ideologies. Okay? And in the last week, in the 12th week, we have discussed science and technology in India. Okay? In the 34th lecture, we have discussed reception of modern science in India. Okay? I mean, the process of democratization of scientific knowledge in the Indian context, institutionalization of modern science in colonial India, policies of colonial rulers and limitations, reception of modern science in colonial India. And when we say how modern science was received in India, or how science was democratized in India, it is by building scientific institutions in 19th century India that we can see. Okay? In terms of the establishment of Hindu College, Delhi College, the Aligarh Scientific Society, the Bihar Scientific Society, and the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science. Okay? We have discussed this, and we have also mentioned categorically that the building of such scientific institutions, whatever Delhi College, Hindu College, Aligarh Scientific Society, Bihar Scientific Society, the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, the building of such scientific institutions by the cultural elites during the colonial period as a part of the process of democratizing scientific knowledge rather than, I mean, more so democratizing scientific knowledge. Okay? And such institutions, I mean, science in India was institutionalized and democratized not because of the colonial government, but in spite of the colonial government. Democratization of science in India, as we have discussed, is an unfinished task even now. As such, modern science is being critiqued from the point of view of environment and human rights. Democratization may be institutionalized in the process of science policy making. That should be a broad based, democratic, transparent and participatory process. And in the and when we look at the post colonial science in India, we must reflect on science policies in India. Okay? There must be a transition from colonial to post colonial period. Okay? In science policies in India, we have discussed chiefly 4 policies: scientific policy resolution of 1958, technology policy statement of 1983, science and technology policy of 2003, and science, technology and innovation policy of 2013. While dealing with science and technology policy of 2003 and science, technology and innovation policy of 2013, it is important to discuss the context of intellectual property rights regime. It is important to discuss the patents, trademark, which we have discussed, and the 36th lecture, I mean this lecture, we provided a summary of the course. I am sure all of you will have a fruitful experience. You will enjoy this experience, you will have a fruitful, useful experience with this course. If any question is, if there is any question in your mind, any query in your mind, any doubt in your mind, if any disagreement in your mind, you can post them on the NPTEL MOOC portal. Okay? I hope will have, and you will also appear in the test. There will be assignments, there will be end semester examination, final examination. I hope everybody performs very well in the course, in the examination. It is not simply examination. If you understand this course, then the entire purpose of delivering such lectures will be fruitful. I hope everybody performs very well in the course and in life as such. Thank you.